Hello, and welcome everybody to the National Trends in Disability Employment,
or nTIDE,
Lunch and Learn series.
Just a few housekeeping items before we begin.
This webinar is being recorded.
We will post an archive of each webinar each month on our website at www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE.
This site will also provide copies of the presentations, the speakers' bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources.
As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer.
To ask questions of the speakers, click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box.
Speakers will review these questions and provide answers during the last section of the webinar.
Some questions may be answered directly in the Q&A box.
If you have any questions following this recording, please contact us at disability.statistics@unh.edu
or toll free at 866-538-9521 for more information.
Thanks for joining us.
Enjoy today's webinar.
Hi, everybody. I'm Denise Roselle from the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, and I will be acting as the moderator, I guess, for the call today. Why don't we flip to the next slide. This, as we've said before, this monthly Lunch and Learn happens every month at noon, usually on the first Friday of the month, but this particular month is happening on the second Friday, because that's when the Department of Labor Statistics has issued their new statistics. So we're a week off, I suppose you'd say. Thank you. I hope you all made it, and I'm glad you all did. This is a joint effort of UNH Institute on Disability, the Kessler Foundation, and the Association of University Centers on Disabilities as part of the Rehab and Research Training Center on Employment Policy and Measurement, which is funded by NIDLR, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Next slide. So let me run through exactly what we're going to do today, and then we'll get started. The first thing we're going to do is go through the nTIDE monthly report. That's looking at the labor statistics that came out today. And that will be John O'Neill from the Kessler Foundation and Deb Brucker from UNH Institute on Disability. Andrew Houtenberg is not with us today, so Deb's going to be playing Andrew's role. And that's kind of why I'm moderating today as well, because we're missing Andrew. So the second part, I will come back again and we'll talk about the nTIDE, kind of the news of what's going on in the field, in policy, in reports, new things that I think you should be interested in that have kind of come across the screen in the last month. And then I will introduce our guest speaker. We often have an interviewee. We do not have an interviewee this month, but we will again in the future. That's not something we're giving up at all. We are going to have a guest speaker, and Larry Worth will be the guest speaker. He is the executive director for ViaQuest Foundation, and he will come next. We will be taking questions throughout through the chat box, but we will answer all the questions at the end. So if you have questions, be sure and put them into the chat box, and we'll be looking at them. If we can answer, as we go along, we will, but otherwise we'll come back to all the questions at the end. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to John O'Neill from the Kessler Foundation to talk about the numbers.
Good day, everybody. I'm going to be doing the first part of the nTIDE report. Next slide. nTIDE is a monthly report and a press release, including an infographic that looks at the most recent employment statistics. And it uses information from the jobs report that's released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on the first Friday, usually the first Friday of each month. And as Denise said, this is a joint effort between the Kessler Foundation and the University of New Hampshire that dates back to 2013, in fact. Next slide, please. The source of the data is the current population survey that's fielded by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's the source for the official unemployment rate. It includes civilians age 16 to 64 who are not living in institutions. And this information has been available since 2008 onward. That was the year that the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics included the 6 questions on disability. Unfortunately, the data is not yet seasonally adjusted, which is why we compare the current month to the same month in the last year. Deb Brucker will now present the numbers.
Hi everyone, this is Deb Brucker from the UNH Institute on Disability. Next slide, please. We have some good news this month. We see increases in the employment to population ratio for persons with disabilities, increasing from 27.7% from November 2016 to 30% in November 2017, up 8.3%. There was a slight increase in the employment to population ratio for people without disabilities from 73.1% to 73.6% over the same time period. Next slide. We also saw increases in the labor force participation rate for people with disabilities from 31.1% from November 2016 to 33.1% in November 2017, up 6.4% or 2 percentage points. And the rates for people without disabilities stayed quite similar over the last year from 76.4% to 76.5%. Next slide. So this slide shows the trend over time from 2008 to the current data that we have. And looking at the lower line, you can see that the employment to population ratio for persons with disabilities, as I mentioned earlier, is 30% at this point. And that's still not at the level it was before the recession, which was 31.4%. And you can see that for people without disabilities, their employment to population ratio is nearly that of what it was at the beginning of the recession. So while it's good news for people with disabilities in increasing their employment to population and labor force participation statistics over time, there's still more work that needs to be done. And we'll be hearing later on from Larry Worth from ViaQuest about some ways that employers can partner with disability organizations at the local level to increase their hiring and retention of people with disabilities. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Denise.
I have to unmute myself. I want to correct one thing I said earlier. I kept referring to questions in the chat box. Actually, the questions go in the question and answer box. So if you've got questions, be sure and put them in the question and answer box, and we will take them and answer them as we go along, or at the end of the end of the call after Larry speaks. Okay, so next slide. So what I'm here to talk about, a number of things. Over the last several months, we do generally a public policy, federal policy update, because there's so much that is going on right now that affects the work that folks dealing with employment for people with disabilities need to know about. The first thing, and you can tell that I did these slides a day or two ago because we do have a new continuing resolution. So let's talk first about budget appropriations, then I'll talk a little bit about tax. So in the budget and appropriations arena, the current continuing resolution, or the one that we were operating under, would take us through December 8th. That would be today. And if they hadn't done any kind of a further continuing resolution, the government would have shut down tonight at midnight. So yesterday, the Senate and the House passed a new continuing resolution, which would take us through December 22nd. So within 2 weeks, we're going to be having the same conversation again, unless they can negotiate either passage of an omnibus, meaning all of the actual appropriation bills that need to be put into place, or yet another continuing resolution. This is because we don't have actual appropriations in place. And since the new fiscal year started October 1st, we've been operating under that continuing resolution. So they have to figure something out to fund the government. Now we have until December 22nd. The things that are still outstanding on that issue from the Democratic side, The Democrats are saying that they want to do something, and some of the Republicans actually, that they want to do something on DACA, on immigration, and the Dreamers. So that would be one thing that Democrats and some Republicans are saying they want in any bill that passes. The Republicans want to increase the amount of money going to the Pentagon in any bill that passes. The Democrats are saying if you're going to increase money to the Pentagon and to defense, then you have to also increase money to non-discretionary programs, like the kinds that we care about and that we often have funding from in some cases. So those programs, that's one of the disagreements that will have to be settled before they can try and actually put budget and appropriations in place. So, and another one that's out there and query what's going to happen or where is the reauthorization of the CHIP program, the Children's Health Insurance Program. That money for that expired as of October 1st. There is some money that they have found, kind of some extra money that they found that's been going to states since then. But states are beginning to run out of money, and they're beginning, Colorado, for instance, has had to give notice to the families who are in CHIP that they are running out of money and may have to find other means to insure their children if the Senate and House don't do something. So CHIP is also something, it's a bipartisan bill. Everybody seems to agree. They just can't figure out where to put it to get it actually passed, and the money is running out. So that's another pressure on what happens in budget and appropriations. In general, as I've said to you in past months, in general, what they're looking at in the appropriations bills is predominantly level funding. There are a few places where there are major cuts. I think I've mentioned before that the supported employment program is zeroed out in a lot of the bills that are before that, the appropriations bills that they're looking at. And that's an important one, obviously, for the audience who's listening to this. But there are other, a lot of the other programs are level funded. Okay, so let's move on next to tax reform. Not the slides. Sorry, Dennis, back the slide. Okay, tax reform. As you have probably been following, the House and the Senate have both passed tax reform legislation. They are very different bills, so they are being conferenced. The reason that this is important to the folks on this call is that basically the deficit increases that will be incurred based on the tax reform, because obviously if you have tax cuts, then not as much revenue is coming in. There is so much revenue that probably won't be coming in that there's going to be increased pressure in the future, query how soon that will be, to cut entitlements and discretionary programs. So obviously that starts talking about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, but also discretionary programs that fund various services for people with disabilities. The other thing that these tax bills have in them are cuts to other kinds of deductions that are important to people with disabilities. It discontinues the hiring deduction that business can do for people with disabilities. It discontinues the deduction for medical expenditures where you can deduct when your medical expenditures are over 10% of your income. There is and on devices, same thing. There is apparently some negotiation going on around the medical expenses piece. They may put something back in on that. But again, this is all being conferenced right now. So I really urge you to watch that, to connect with the people that you connect with, both your members, but also to connect with the people that you connect with that give you updates on what's happening on this, because this is an important one, and it's going to affect funding for the programs that we care about for the foreseeable future, really. Okay, now, next slide. So that's the policy update. There are other things that I try to bring you each month to say, here's something else that's new and going on. This one jumped out at me because it's from PETE, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. I see I have a typo there, from ODEP. And it's all around WIOA and what WIOA means for accessible technologies and for the American Job Centers. There is a link in that title to take you to a specialized page that PETE has put out. There are a lot of really good materials there. And I must say, one of the things that I hear consistently, and I would kind of assume that you do, is that the AJCs, the American Job Centers, don't do a very good job with people with disability, or on behalf of people with disabilities, and particularly as regards accessibility. So one of the things that we always said was that AJCs must be physically and programmatically accessible. And now these are resources that Pete has come out with to say, here are some ways that you can do that. Here are some questions you can ask. So there's a guide to make sure that websites and online systems and courses are accessible. There's a fact sheet that kind of puts an at-the-glance overview of the technology-related implications of WIOA and then where to find the assistance. There's even a presentation deck designed for internal presentations within AJCs. And then there's a digital accessibility checklist as well. I would encourage any of you, and I'm guessing that many of you are, who work with the American Job Centers in your states or localities, look at these things and share this information with them. I know from the other side, from the AJC side, it's hard to know what to do. They kind of think of themselves as not specialized in disability, and this is a way of helping them become specialized in disability, and also a way for you to show that you're a resource on these topics and for you to connect with them. And I think that's a fabulous connection to make, because you are the experts on these. You are a resource for them, and the law requires them now to be accessible programmatically and physically. So the more we can work together, the more that we provide better services. Okay, next slide. There are a couple of interesting e-policy kind of online dialogues going on right now that I wanted to highlight for you. This is another one that is from ODEP, and it's hosted by SEED, which is the State Exchange on Employment and Disability from ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Programs. So this is an extension of their Work Matters report. I hope you've seen that and you remember what I'm talking about. This was done as a collaboration between ODEP, the Council of State Governments, and the National Council of State Legislatures a couple of years ago. And is a really nice report on policy options, strategies, state-level programs that are happening in various states on disability employment. And it's what they're working on now is how those can be replicated in other states. So it's a really nice partnership that they're forming between legislatures, Council of State Governments, which is both legislatures and also more local and regional, and disability. So this is an online dialogue. They are looking for your ideas to help state legislatures and legislators ensure that their policies promote employment of people with disabilities. And it's going on through December 15th. I put the link there. Go online, join the dialogue, make some suggestions, talk about what programs that you already have. A lot of times I know I hear folks in the field, John Butterworth from UNH is one of those who ICI is one of those who will often say, we know what to do for disability employment. We know what the answers are. We just can't get that out there to people who are listening, or we haven't done a good enough job of getting it out there. And this is a way to get that out there. It's to get it to people who are listening. It's to get it to, and those reports with the suggestions you make will be used in further work with the Council of State Governments and National Conference of State Legislatures. So I really encourage you to go on and make comments. Okay, next slide. Another e-policy dialogue. This one's related to veterans and disabled veterans and employers. This one is hosted again by ODEP, the Department of Labor's Veterans Employment and Training Service, and the EEOC. So they're, again, looking for ways to ensure that disabled veterans and their employers understand their workplace rights. And it's, again, going to play a pivotal role, those comments, in what the federal government's resources and materials look like in the future in terms of workplace for protections for disabled veterans. It's also going through December 15th. It was supposed to end earlier, I believe, but they've extended it. There's a link there. It's another way to hook in and say, yes, we understand how to do this. We are good at it. We have done it before. Here are some ideas, and or here are some resources we need. If you're providing employment services to people with disabilities, but maybe you're not being able to break into the veterans community, it can be a little different. Maybe there's a resource that you need that would be useful. I really urge you to go in there. This is a direct way to get to some folks who will really be making decisions. Next slide. And on that same veterans note, EARN, yet another one of those programs that are sponsored by the federal government, Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion, EARN, is doing a webinar on December 14th from 1 to 2:30 Eastern, tapping into the talents of America's heroes, hiring and retaining disabled vets. Again, it's strategies for employers to recruit, hire, advance, retain veterans with disabilities. You know, experts from the federal government, from some private industry, from some of the VSOs who are serving disabled vets will be on that call. So I would say either, again, if I mentioned before, if you're doing services for individuals with disabilities in the employment arena and you're not yet being able to break through into the veterans arena, or you are and you have some other expertise to share, I would encourage you to get on this webinar. Next slide. This one is one that's close to my heart. I worked for 15 years at Easter Seals, and one of the things that Easter Seals was involved in and continues to be in some of the local affiliates is agribility. For those of you who don't know what agribility is, it is disability. It's trying to keep farmers and ranchers on the farms. So it's services to farmers and ranchers with disabilities, and particularly around technology issues, to keep farmers and ranchers on the farm. And this is a qualitative assessment of the effectiveness of agribility. It's funded through USDA. And I'm thrilled to say that it's a 10-year, they're looking at 10 years. They're looking at folks from 27 states. And what they have found is there's a statistically significant difference in the group who received agribility services to the no treatment comparison group in terms of quality of life and independent living and working levels. You know, the N was 225 people, which in terms of ranchers and farmers getting services is a good number of folks from 12 states who had participated in agribility. And this is the first study that I've seen, at least, that does a kind of a quantitative assessment of the effectiveness. And I am thrilled to see that what many of us have already known and heard from stories and from folks who actually receive these services is that we can show quantitatively now over 10 years that it's true, that these are really effective services. The other thing I want to point out to folks, whether you're thinking agribility or whether you're thinking something else, these types of quantitative assessments of effectiveness are hugely important in whatever services we're looking at these days, in the employment realm as well as in anything else, frankly. That's what will affect funding at the federal level. That's what's affecting funding at the state level, the effectiveness numbers, outcome numbers, all of these kinds of data bites that show statistical significance are hugely important in how programs are getting continued, ramped up, spread across the country, any of that. And I really urge you to use this as an example to think about any of the other programs that you're doing and how you can show the same level. Publication is a great way to do it. So it jumped out at me at two different points. Okay, next slide. This is another interesting one that I don't know if folks have heard about, and I just wanted to raise it. There is this program at the State Department called Professional Fellows Program. Just in general, the Professional Fellows Program. AUCD, where I work, has been, did the first couple of cadres of folks coming from other countries to the United States, working on some projects that they can then take home. The next one that we are working with the State Department on has to do with disability employment, inclusive disability employment. And I thought folks from this call would be really interested. There will be 20 emerging leaders who are leaders in inclusive employment, from Kenya to, I've got something on my screen, from Kenya, I'm sorry, I can't see the slide. There we go. From Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. What they do is they come here for a 5-week fellowship. They learn about disability rights, inclusive employment. They then do a 4-week, 4 of those weeks are at a host site, and the U.S. hosts provide mentorship, collaborate to help them figure out what they're taking back. So then they have work to take back to their home countries. And what's interesting about this one is they're now looking for hosts. So I thought this would be an interesting thing. Certainly a number of the USIDs in the past have acted as hosts, but it is not limited to USIDs. So I urge any of the USIDs on the phone, the University Centers on Excellence in Developmental Disability, or any of the anyone else on the phone who might like to be a host, to go to the link and look it up. Folks on the, certainly spreading inclusive employment internationally is a fabulous way to work internationally, and we have some, again, we have stories to tell. So I would urge you to go look if it's something you're interested in. Next slide. And then just lastly from me, you saw this slide last month and you'll probably see it next month as well. I just want to remind everybody that the 2017 Annual Disability Statistics Compendium is coming up in February in DC. This is the link to it, and save the date. Okay, next slide. That's the end for me. I am going to pass it off to Larry Worth in just a second so that he, our guest speaker. Larry is the executive director of the ViaQuest Foundation, a nonprofit with the mission of developing inclusive cultures and creating pathways to employment for veterans and people with disabilities within corporations, within nonprofit organizations, within government agencies, school districts, and other entities that seek to hire a diverse workforce. Larry's passion, energy, and insightful direction have led to many people with disabilities entering the workforce within a multitude of industries. Larry is a member of Advice, a national autism inclusion consulting team sponsored by Autism Speaks, Next for Autism, and the Poses Family Foundation. He's also a member of APSE, the Association of People Supporting Employment First. So Larry, I'm going to hand it over to you, and welcome to the nTIDE Lunch and Learn.
Thanks, Denise. I really appreciate that. So I'd like to thank the entire nTIDE partners for inviting me to be a guest speaker today. And, you know, I really, as many of you do, I'm sure, I really enjoy and really look forward to receiving and reading the nTIDE email I get every month. And so this is really an honor to be able to be here today and be a guest speaker at this Lunch and Learn. So we could have the next slide, please. So I'm gonna, today I was asked to talk a little about the corporate disability hiring strategies. And so kind of give a little bit about the ViaQuest Foundation. What we do is, the ViaQuest Foundation, we work with large corporations to help them create their disability inclusion strategy, and then we help roll that out throughout their entire network. So these are the very, very large corporations that have multiple locations throughout the nation, you know, ranging from, you know, a handful to hundreds of locations, you know, coast to coast. Some are international. And so we help them create their strategy, and then we help connect them to the disability world. So then they can have basically a pipeline of people with disabilities to begin hiring and putting into their positions. So we spend a lot of time working with the corporations on how they hire people in general, and then we seek to help them create pathways specifically for veterans and people with disabilities. So that is a overview of what we do. We also do a lot of things with schools, and then we do some other things. But today we're going to talk about corporate disability hiring strategies, and really truly talk about what we're seeing out there right now, and kind of give you a landscape of some of the strategies that corporations are using now to attract, hire, and retain people with disabilities. We could go to the next slide, please. So when you know back in the day when we first all got into hiring with people with disabilities, we'd go to the local mom and pops or a local store and say, you know, make the case for someone to hire with, you know, someone with disabilities, and then support them. The corporations are now getting into the game, and they're seeing that something that we've known all along, that the people that we support and the people in our industry that are looking for jobs that have disabilities, they're phenomenal workers and the last untapped labor pool. So they really want to get into, you know, they really want to tap into this group of individuals for potential hires. So these strategies, you know, there's goals to these strategies. There's a business case for their strategies. It's not a charity anymore. It's a business strategy. So there's a business side of it, but then there's also, you know, the disability side of it, and they got to be aware of that. So all the goals of these corporations is really designed to provide people with autism and other disabilities an advantage, a greater opportunity to be employed. So they may look like they're a little bit different, but that difference is to provide them an advantage. So they want to hire people with disabilities, so they want to make that an advantage. They're also focused on providing the applicant with an opportunity to provide or to prove that they can do the job. So, you know, the typical applicant has had a work history. They've typically they've had some experience. That's usually not necessarily the case for a lot of the people in our industry, the people that we support. You know, a lot of them have maybe come out of a workshop, or they haven't had an opportunity to gain the experience in a field that they want to be employed. So where you and I or others may have had a job in high school or in college that prepared us for what we ultimately wanted to do. The people that we support, or the people with disabilities looking for employment right now, may have not had that opportunity. So when they submit a resume, or they go online to an applicant tracking system to apply for a position, they may not have that experience. So traditionally or previously, when someone applied to a position online, they may have got looked over because they didn't have that experience. So the corporations are aware of this, and they said, okay, how can we do that? How can we address that? And so a lot of these strategies are focused on providing the applicant with the opportunity to prove that they can do it. And every single one of these strategies are aligned with the corporation's culture and operations. Again, this is not you know, a charity, so they're going to hire people who fit their culture, who they're looking for longer term employees, which we know our folks are. But they have to be a good fit, and they have to fit into not only be able to do the job, but they have to be able to fit into their culture and be an asset to their operation. And if you next slide, please. Other goals of the strategies is they again, along with their operational operations, they typically align with their staffing strategy. So I said earlier that we spend a lot of time looking at how corporations attract talent, how they onboard people, how they staff. A lot of these companies have very specific ways that they staff, and to be effective, these strategies have to closely mirror how these large corporations do staffing. Now, there's some modifications, obviously, like I said earlier, but you know, they have to be closely mirror what they do, so they're not a one-off. They're very similar. Other things that corporations identify and they recognize is that that people with disabilities, to have some success or have success, it may need job coaching, or may involve mentoring. So they provide those avenues. So whether they traditionally may have not said, we're not so sure about job coaching, and now they're saying, okay, let's look at that. Let's see how that might look in our locations or our facilities. And a lot of them are setting up mentoring programs that benefit everybody that's in their facilities. So starting to take a look at some of those things. And then this last point that I put on here, it's outside of our industry norm. And I think this is something that when we start once we have a strategy, once the corporation says, yes, this is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and they start rolling it out to the various facilities, and they start connecting to the disability world, they run into not necessarily barriers. They just run into some resistance here and there, and that's because a lot of these strategies might be outside of what our industry is used to. Our industry is not used to true staffing modules, and so that has taken our industry some time to get used to it and some time to understand. And so where corporations are used to moving at a very fast pace and saying, hey, I need people, bring me people, they've had to slow down a little bit and work with our industry because it's a learning process for us as well. So I wanted to kind of put that on there that say, this is a little bit different than something that our industry might be used to, but it's effective. And it's what the corporations are used to. And if we can align with that, we're going to have some great outcomes. Next slide, please. So just kind of hit on some things that are out there now. You can ask questions and we can talk about some of these things. But again, I ask you to remember that all of these are designed to give an advantage to the person, the applicant with a disability. So the first one is a pre-application simulated trial. So whether that trial is in their facility or outside of their facility, it is designed for someone with disability who may not have the experience or the resume that shows they have the experience doing the job. This is an opportunity for them to prove it, okay, to prove that they can do it. And if they can do it, then they get an opportunity for a job. And, there's a very large e-commerce company that uses this. Walgreens use this. A few other companies have used this with tremendous success. And, it really does provide an opportunity if designed properly. And if it really does lead to employment, if designed properly, has tremendous outcomes. Other things is direct application with HR notification. So what this means is, so all these large corporations have online application system or ATS, applicant tracking system, and they all have cutoffs. So if they're cut off for a position, they post a position, and their cutoff is 50 applicants. And that's how they do random selection and their affirmative action and a lot of other things. So if you have the best candidate and the best person applies and they're number 51 and they only take 50, doesn't matter who they are, they don't get in. And you get the nice little notification letter saying, hey, thanks for applying. We're going to keep your resume on file. Doesn't matter how great you are, you're not in the top 50. So what the direct application with HR notification does is if you apply online, you're number 300 and they only take 50, and they have their strategy is to notify the HR manager when you or your person applies. If you do that, you now get preferential treatment. So you now get into the 50. So you now get to be evaluated along with that top 50. So that gives you preferential treatment. That gives you an advantage over everybody else. So a large employer that does this is Cintas. This is something that they do. They have 550 locations nationwide, and this is what they do. And then from there, they have an interview process where, again, you get an opportunity to show that you can do it. Other companies do temp to hire, and this is a strategy that many companies use. Whether you or I or anybody would want to get a job somewhere, you may have to go through a temp service or do a year contract first. It's not because someone with a disability has it or is being required to do it. It's their hiring strategy. It's just what they do. And they do it for a variety of different reasons. And so, but it's actually a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity to have, to get into attempt to hire, to prove that you can do the job. And I've seen, we work with companies that have done that have had tremendous success hiring people with disabilities through that system. The contract is the same type of thing. Other types of things, and many of you might have done this in school environments, is the work experience programs. Students come, in the last year of high school or junior or senior year of high school, have a work experience program or work experience partnership with a business to where they can do a few hours of work experience per week. That can then lead to employment after they're done with school. That's something that's becoming extremely popular, especially with WIOA, as Denise kind of outlined there. You're starting to see a lot of work experience programs being developed, and if that's something of interest to you, I think that's a tremendous opportunity. Along that same line, internships, apprenticeships. There's a really big push right now with apprenticeships. These are all designed to have the people, gain experience, prove that they can do it, and then when they prove that they can do it, then that can turn into long-term positions. And again, these are all hiring strategies that companies use in general, and again, they're all designed to give advantages to those with disabilities to show that they can do it. The next slide, please. So when we go out and we talk to companies and we talk to disability support agencies around the nation, there's a lot of opportunity right now through these corporations, and a lot of corporations they're seeing our industry as an area of great opportunity for them. And this opportunity is requiring our industry to change a little bit, to kind of look at things differently. And I know, from experience, this creates a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of questions and we get some pushback here and there. But I would say that, there is a tremendous opportunity here to work with corporations and work within these type of strategies to have people with disabilities hired at a large rate. But it's going to require some flexibility. It'll require some things that we're not, as an industry, maybe not used to doing. Seeing a lot of it, more and more of it, like collaboration between providers and agencies, something that we're starting to see a lot more, where they're doing joint development or they're working together with a company to help them meet their needs. There's a lot of creative collaboration that's beginning to go out there to capitalize on this opportunity, which I think is phenomenal. If you look at the corporate world in general, you're starting to see these large corporations partner. Large corporations that you're like, I read an article about, corporations from different industries starting to work together. And that's kind of like what I'm starting to see in our industry as well, is we're starting to see some of these providers and agencies start to work together to help and to meet the needs of these large corporations, which I think is very, very cool. And if we can align, our services with their hiring practices, the result can be incredible. And I've seen it, those that are in our industries have seen it. And so I'd encourage you, if this is something that is of interest and again, it's a little different than what we're normally, used to talking about, but this is, maybe the next evolution of what we're doing. And the corporations out there are wanting to speak with you and wanting to hire people with disabilities, but they have a very specific way of doing that. So, being flexible to meet their needs is something that we gotta look at. Next slide. I think that's the final slide. There's my information. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I can talk more about it at length. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to if you're not already linked with me, feel free to reach out and link with me there, and we can talk more. So yeah. Denise?
Thanks so much, Larry. That was great. I noted, and I would encourage everyone, if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the question and answer box, and we will respond to those, whether they're questions for Larry or for Deb or John or for me, and we'll get back to those. There is one question, Larry, in the box that says, for direct hire with HR notification, do you have to disclose having a disability? How does that work?
So this, disclosure is a personal preference. Obviously, that's a very personal decision that you need to make. That the direct hire with HR notification at that company, if that's what they're saying is their way to hire people with disabilities, it is to your advantage. It is to your advantage to disclose, but that is because that would mean that company has said, if you reach out to us, we will give you an advantage over everybody else because of your disability, because we want to hire you because of your disability. We see your disability as an advantage to us. But still, that is a very, very personal decision to make. But one, if you make that, it could propel you further with those particular companies. But that's not something that I should say yes or no, because that's not my decision to make for you. But these type of companies, when you do that, you are giving yourself an advantage. Having a disability, these companies are no longer at a disadvantage. They are absolutely an advantage. And when any of us are looking for a job, any advantage you could have, use it. Getting a job is very, very difficult. And so my general advice, I don't care who's listening, is if you find any advantage, use it. Use it, absolutely use it.
I have another one here for you too, Larry. Someone's asking, where do you find your talent pool?
So this is something that I've had probably 15 conversations about it this week alone. So we all know, like 10% of the talent with disability is in the system, right? In the system of VR or being supported. The other 90% are in colleges, and still at mom and dad's home or have their own apartment. They are working at, they're underemployed for whatever reason and trying to reach out to them. And that's a conversation that we try to address all the time. And honestly, where we try to find them is where you try to find any other talent. Mm-hmm. So what we're looking at now is we're trying to reach out, and we talk about partnering. So we're trying to reach out and partner to traditional staffing methods, because staffing companies and staffing methods they know how to reach people. And we know that wherever there's people, there are people with disabilities. And so, of course we go and we talk to the traditional methods of vocational rehabilitation and disability support providers. But we're trying to look at other angles too, and looking at colleges and universities and other places. We can't rely on the 10% that go through traditional methods to help these companies. We got to be more creative.
Okay, so this next one, they've gone back again to, it says, going back to the first question, how does one know if a company is using the HR notification? Is it apparent through the online application process of companies? Would help in making a decision of disclosure if one knows this is in effect?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. Some might be very obvious. They might say, they might broadcast it out, like Cintas broadcast it out. They say, tell us. Others may have it on their ACS system. So HR notification could mean an email to an actual person, or it could mean selecting the box. So selecting the box, it may say, if you say, how did you hear about us? Or how did you do this? There could be a box that says, disability program or whatever that program is. They will broadcast out that they are, here's our program for people with disabilities, and it may be called this, like Pepsi has Pepsi Act. So if you want to apply at Pepsi, you have a disability and you want to, use that to your advantage and go through the program, it's Pepsi Act. And so you select that when you complete their online application. That puts you into that takes you out of the big group of every people and puts you into the advantage. That's where you guys start looking at how did you hear about us, and start looking about those type of things.
And we're still talking about this disclosure issue. So do you think employers who are required to provide Section 503 voluntary disability disclosure forms, do they tend to be friendly towards candidates who disclose, or do you find them to be more reticent? I would hope they would be more friendly, right? Gosh, I'd hope that. I'd hope everybody would be friendly. I would say that if they are making a statement that we are about hiring people with disabilities, they're going to be more friendly, especially if they have some sort of specific voluntary notification. We're saying, we want you to do this because we want to. A lot of companies out there, it's not just about checking the box for 503. It's some companies want to, because of their culture, they want to know, because they want to help provide opportunities for you or your family. So it's not just saying, hey, I want to add you to my percentage. It's, I want to know, because if something happens to you, I want, as a corporation, as your manager, I want to be able to support you because I care about you. That's more when I go out and talk to companies, that's more the reason for that than because I want to just show the government that I've got X percentage. Now there's companies out there like that, but that's rarely the case when a corporation's truly about hiring people with disabilities. Okay, so who, if you want to talk about hiring, so who's typically the best person to contact at a large corporation when reaching out to them seeking dialogue with representatives about hiring people with disabilities? And what's the best mode of communication when reaching out to them? Right.
So I'll say that this is a wonderful question, and so there are a lot of points of entry, okay, and so if the company has what's called our ERG or a BRG, which is a employee resource group or a business resource group for disabilities, you want to find them, because their whole reason of being is to support people with disabilities inside that company. If that's too difficult to find, which that's probably not going to be on their website anywhere, but you might want to find a local person who has a connection to disability, or find that person who might be within your network, or someone that network that might have a connection to disability. That's where you start, because if you try to go send an email to a corporation's chief diversity officer, it's going to go nowhere. Okay, I don't care who you are. So that's their job is to talk to and to support disability. But let's be honest. You're not going to get an audience with them. Same thing is if you walk into a big box store and say, hey, I want to talk to you about disability. That's going to be very difficult. That's when you're going to get let me go talk to corporate, because what you just did is you just walked in and interrupted their day. That's going to be very, very difficult. So I'd say do your research, find out what they're doing, work within your network to find people who have connections, and then work with them to start working up the chain. And it takes a while. It takes a while, but they're there, and you'll find them.
So, Larry, I've got a question here about your experience with folks with mental health disabilities, and maybe talking a little bit to that specifically.
So, VitalQuest does work with people with mental health. Not as frequently, but we know that there's a lot of overlap with what we do. So, we tend to work in the same fashion with all people of need as we do with people with disabilities. We say, what we do with people with disabilities can transcend and can work through all different categories. So whether it's veterans, whether it's homeless, whether it's mental health, whether it's disabilities and all that stuff. So if you work with the corporation on how to connect to those and those resources, that's typically how we work. So I can't. That's a very broad answer, but
Sure.
It's very difficult to get very specific on one very thing.
Okay, thanks. Let me go back to the conversation we were having a minute ago about VR and the folks in VR versus others. So this is for the 90% not working with vocational rehabilitation. How are they assisted with accommodations when they make a formal request?
Yeah. So making the formal request is critical, right? So you have to be able to before you can even have an accommodation, you have to make that formal request. And something that we talk a lot to corporations about is accommodation. And many accommodations are low cost, no cost. We're not, back in the day when you talk about accommodations, companies are going, oh my gosh, I got to put in a $50,000 ramp or something like that. That's not the case. Usually an accommodation might be, hey, can I leave 2 minutes early before my break to go to the bathroom because it takes me a little bit longer? Or can I have can I stand for 5 minutes? Or, can I, my transportation might, take a little bit longer to get here. Can I have flexibility in scheduling? Those type of things aren't, it's a rarity to find a massively expensive accommodation. Mm-hmm. So what I'd say is even if they're not, in with, the 90% that isn't in vocational rehabilitation, but doesn't have that money attached, still have that conversation with that company. Depending on what that accommodation might be needed, corporations are fantastic at being creative. Okay. And so, and even better being the corporation who's better at, being creative than the corporation is the person who knows how to do the job. So, what you think you might need you might need, I might need this accommodation. Working with that corporation, you might find a workaround for that. Not that you don't need it. You just might not need something that costs, $3,000. You might need something that, there might be a workaround for that because of the systems, or maybe it's technology that they have that you can use differently, but you can't do any of that without the conversation. You got to have that conversation. You just can't, and if you don't have that conversation, shame on you, because now you can't do the job, and bad things are going to happen to you because of that.
That's a great answer and a great place to leave. I don't have any more questions in the question box. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. The folks on the call, the panelists, John, Deb, Larry, everybody who joined in on the call. You have information, so you can contact any of us if you have additional questions after today. And we look forward to talking with you again next month on the first Friday of the month on the nTIDE Lunch and Learn. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your afternoon. They're reminding me I should talk about that. There you go. Dennis, you can flip the slide. That's all good. Take the survey. I should have told you that. I've already said goodbye to you, but take the survey. Tell us what you think. We absolutely want to know what you think. And if you have ideas for people who can come in the future, we would love to hear that too. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dennis. Next slide.